Hello, my name is Eric Fonbonne. I am a child psychiatrist and an epidemiologist at OHSU in Portland, Oregon. With colleagues, we present today an article entitled Emotional and Behavioral Problems in Youth with Autism, High Prevalence and Impact on Functioning, which is published in the Journal of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics. This study was supported by an NIMH grant to Dr. Frances Lynch. Autism is common, affecting about 2% of the child population in the US, and comorbid problems are frequent. Studies have reported as well an increased prevalence of psychiatric disorders, but these studies were often conducted in clinical samples and lacked control groups. So we had two main research questions. The first one is, in a population-based context, are psychiatric problems still raised in children with autism? And how does that compare to children who have a chronic medical condition but without autism? Then, are the psychiatric problems in children with autism an additional source of impairment that adds over and beyond that derived from autism per se? Our study was conducted at 3 Kaiser Permanente sites in Hawaii, California, and Oregon, and the Oshin Clinical Network in Oregon. We selected children through their ICD-10 codes in electronic health records. We had 3 groups, one with autism, one with asthma, and a comparison group with none of the first 2 diagnoses. Children were aged 3 to 17, and they are matched on sex and age across the 3 groups. We had a final sample of 1,267 participants with sample size roughly balanced across the 3 groups. This is part of a broader study, the R-KID study, which is longitudinal in design and is aiming at evaluating the cost for families to have to raise a child with a chronic condition, either autism or a medical chronic condition. Parents complete surveys at baseline and 4 months later and 8 months later. In our particular study, we only use baseline data, therefore our analyses are cross-sectional. The surveys completed by parents included several measures, of which we had first the Strength and Difficulties Questionnaire, SDQ, a measure of child psychopathology that yields 2 scores. One is an emotional and behavioral scores describing the anxiety, ADHD symptoms, oppositional symptoms in a child in its current level of functioning. And the second is an impact score, which evaluates the degree of distress and impaired functioning in the child due to his symptoms across different contexts, at home, in the classroom, in the community, and with peers. The second measure was the Social Responsiveness Scale, which is a parent-based questionnaire that evaluates current autistic symptomatology and severity. Our first result confirms that emotional and behavioral problems are significantly raised in autism, and significantly so as compared to both the children who have asthma and those who have no condition. This is true across age groups and also across sexes. There was no difference in our study in the rates of emotional and behavioral problems between children with asthma and the controls. Next, we examine the levels of impairment in the 3 groups of children. Again, children with autism displayed much higher levels of impairment as reported by their parents, and these were highly significant when compared to both children with asthma or no conditions. This was true across all age groups and genders. There was otherwise no difference between the children with asthma and those with no asthma or no autism. In order to understand the origins of impairment in children with autism, we restricted further analysis to that subsample of children with autism. First, we found high and positive correlations between autistic symptoms and impairment on one hand, and psychiatric symptoms and impairment on the other hand. However, there also was a high correlation between psychiatric and autistic symptoms, making it difficult to determine what each set of symptoms uniquely contributes to impairment. To address this problem of collinearity, we used a relative importance analysis technique that allows to partition the variance in impairment, the dependent variable, into unique and independent components. The results show that in children with autism in our sample, about half of their impairment derives directly from their autistic symptomatology, but that the other half is attributable to their co-occurring psychiatric symptoms. There is no significant difference between 46% and 52% in this analysis. And finally, it's noticeable that the role of socio-demographic factors was negligible in our evaluation of the sources of impairment. In particular, we didn't find any ethnic minority differences. There are 4 take-home messages. First, we confirmed that emotional and behavioral problems are significantly raised in autism at all ages and in both sexes. In addition, we didn't report the same increase in children with asthma, suggesting that this increased incidence of behavioral problems is specific to autism. Next, when we examine the impairment in functioning in children with autism, we could determine that about half of this impairment derives from autism symptomatology per se, but that the other half is attributable to the co-occurring psychiatric symptomatology. This is an important finding since psychiatric symptoms can be reduced and treated. Third, and that's good news, there is a growing number of evidence-based interventions that has been devised specifically for autism or adapted from non-autistic samples to work with autistic populations, and that tackle problems such as anxiety, depression, ADHD, both using medications or more cognitive behavioral interventions, and we have now a number of RCTs available to demonstrate the efficacy of these interventions in children with autism. Therefore, in order to improve the quality of life of these children and to decrease their impairment, it is suggested that in primary care, that both at the time of initial evaluation but during routine medical visits later on, systematic detection of emotional and behavioral problems is performed by primary care physicians, and that the management of this EBP is given attention through the new evidence-based interventions that are now available. We discuss in the paper other aspects of this study and also its limitations, and I hope you will be encouraged to read it by this brief summary. Thank you very much.